stop, I will buy her. I might have walked away. But then I saw it. On her bare shoulder, half hidden by the torn strap of her strange dress, was a tattoo, a spiraling mark in black ink shaped like a bird taking flight. I froze where I stood. I knew that mark. It was the kind of day when even the sun seemed to look away, high noon, in a city I didn't know, where the dust hung heavy and every street corner smelled of sweat and suspicion. My boots clacked on the uneven boards of the auction yard, but no one cared to glance up. I'd come here for nothing more than a horse and a drink. But I stopped when I heard the shouting. The crowd was gathered tight in a small square between two warehouses, their voices a mixture of laughter, jeers, and cold-blooded commerce. At the center, a wooden platform had been thrown together, and on it stood misery itself. 3 men in dirty coats held a young woman by a length of rope tied cruelly around her wrists. She stood still, though her breath came sharp and fast. Her skin was a soft, bronze hair, black as midnight, loose and wild, and her eyes, dark, proud, unblinking, swept the crowd as if she were daring them to look back. I might have walked away. But then I saw it. On her bare shoulder, half hidden by the torn strap of her strange dress, was a tattoo, a spiraling mark in black ink shaped like a bird taking flight. I froze where I stood. I knew that mark. 5 years ago, lying half dead in the dust of the desert, I'd seen the same mark on the hand of the man who pulled me from the ground and gave me water when no one else would. He was the chief of a tribe that didn't even have a name in my language, and he had saved my life without asking a thing in return. The auctioneer banged a gavel against the post. "Startin' at $5, the crowd murmured. Some laughed at how cheap she was. "5, hell, she ain't worth that much," someone snorted. Her eyes flicked toward the sound, but still she didn't flinch. The crowd pressed closer, some with hunger in their eyes, others with nothing but disdain. I stepped forward without thinking. "5, I said, my voice carrying across the square. The laughter quieted some. Heads turned toward me. The auctioneer blinked, then shrugged. "Sold." I climbed the steps and handed over the coins. As the man untied her wrists and shoved her toward me, I finally met her eyes, and though she didn't say a word, I saw the flicker of surprise, of recognition in them. Her arms trembled, but her chin stayed high. I put my hand on her shoulder, careful but firm, and steered her off the platform. The murmurs behind us followed like a bad wind. "What's the cowboy want with that cursed thing? Fool don't know what he's bought. Let him take her, she'll bring him nothing but death." I ignored them all. We walked together out of the yard and down the side street, her small steps quick to keep up with mine. I could feel the crowd's eyes on my back the whole way, but I didn't care. When we were far enough from the square, I stopped and turned to face her. She didn't speak, not yet, but her eyes stayed locked on mine, and for the first time I saw what was behind them. Fear, yes, but something sharper too. "You know why I bought you?" I asked, quiet enough that no one else could hear. For a moment she hesitated, then she shook her head. I tipped my hat back and said, "Because 5 years ago your father saved me, and it's about time I paid him back." For the first time all day her lips parted, and though her voice was hoarse from thirst and dust, it was strong. "You remember him?" she whispered. "I do," I said. And though I couldn't yet guess what hell lay ahead, I knew one thing as sure as the sky above us: I hadn't just bought her freedom. I'd bought myself a fight. We didn't talk much as we walked. There wasn't much to say, and the city's streets were too full of watching eyes. I led her through the back alleys away from the crowds until we reached the livery where I'd left my horse. She followed close but kept her distance. I caught her glancing over her shoulder more than once, and I couldn't blame her. Folks back there had looked at her like she was a curse someone else ought to carry. When we reached the stable, I stopped and untied my horse. She stood there quietly, hands still red where the ropes had bitten her skin. "What's your name?" I asked. She hesitated, then soft but steady, "Anokei." "Anokei," I repeated. "I'm Wes." She nodded once. I swung into the saddle, then held a hand down. She looked at it, her dark eyes narrowing for a second. Then she climbed up behind me without another word. We rode out of that city in silence, the sound of hooves on hard-packed dirt the only thing between us. It wasn't until the buildings fell away behind us and the plains opened wide again that she finally spoke. "You didn't have to do it," she murmured. "I know," I said. "Why? Because your father saved me once," I told her. "Out in the desert, I'd been shot and left for dead. He patched me up, gave me water, food, let me sleep under his roof." I could feel her shift slightly behind me, her hands gripping the saddle tighter. "That was my father," she said softly. "Tawa." "That was him," I nodded. Then her voice hardened. "He's dead now." I frowned but didn't press. "Not yet." We rode another mile before she spoke again, her words sharp and quiet. "They came to our village at night. Men with guns. Said we had to pay or burn. My father wouldn't give them what they wanted, so they took us instead." Her breath hitched, but she didn't stop. "They took me and my sisters, 3 of us. I'm the oldest. We fought them. I broke loose and ran. They caught me again the next day, but not before I saw what they did to my father. I didn't ask. I didn't need to. They were going to sell me too." She finished, her voice low. "Like my sisters. But I don't know where they took them." Her words sat heavy between us. I kept my eyes ahead on the long stretch of empty land. "You know who they were?" I asked finally. She nodded. "Outlaws. A gang. I know their leader's face, I'll never forget it." Her tone sent a chill through me. "How many of them?" 10, maybe 12. "More back at their camp." I spat into the dust. "That's a lot of men for 2 people to handle." Her hands clenched at my sides. "They took my sisters, I know," I said. She leaned closer, her breath hot at my ear. "You're not afraid, are you?" I smirked despite myself. "Not yet," I said. We rode on until the sky deepened to purple and the stars blinked awake. We made camp by a dry creek bed with just a small fire to keep the chill off. I handed her a piece of jerky and poured water into a tin cup. She took them without a word. After we ate, she finally met my eyes across the fire. "Wes," she said. "Yeah, I know where they'll take them. There's a canyon west of here. Devil's Cut. That's where they keep what they steal before they sell it. Women. Horses. Anything." I nodded slowly. "How far if we ride hard by tomorrow night?" I leaned back, staring up at the stars. "Then tomorrow we ride hard," I said. Her lips curled just slightly, like she almost believed me. And for the first time all day she looked like she might sleep. As she settled down against her blanket, she murmured one last thing, her voice so low I almost missed it. "My sisters' names are Kiona and Misu." I nodded to the darkness. "Kiona. Misu," I repeated. "We'll bring them home." And though the fire cracked and the night stretched cold around us, I felt something new settle into my chest, heavier than any gun or saddle I'd carried. A debt. Not just to her father anymore, but to her. To all 3 of them. And come morning, I aimed to pay it in full. We broke camp before the sun rose, when the desert air still had bite and the stars had just begun to fade. Anokei moved with quiet purpose, her strange tribal dress now cinched tight to let her ride easier, the feather in her hair trembling in the chill wind. Neither of us spoke much. The road ahead was long and the stakes too high for wasted breath. By the time the first streaks of gold split the horizon, we were already miles away from that cursed city. Dust curled up under my horse's hooves and the land stretched out before us, flat, merciless, empty, save for a few lonely cacti and rocks stacked like gravestones. Anokei sat behind me, her hands steady at my belt, her eyes always scanning the horizon. Every so often she'd point and murmur, "They're guiding me toward faint signs I would have missed. Hoof prints shallow in dry earth, a snapped bush branch, ashes from an old campfire." It was clear enough she'd grown up in these lands, and I though I'd ridden them, plenty felt almost clumsy compared to her quiet expertise. We rode fast through the morning and slowed only when the sun climbed high and the heat began to press down. By noon, we came upon the first real sign of them, deep ruts cut into the dirt fresh, and beside them more hoof prints than I cared to count. Anokei slid off the horse and knelt her fingers tracing the grooves in the ground. "They're moving fast," she said, her voice calm. "But not careful. Too many horses. They're overconfident." I swung down and crouched next to her. "You think they know you got away?" She glanced up at me, her face unreadable. "They know by now." She rose and brushed the dust from her hands. "We keep moving. If they reach Devil's Cut before us, it will be harder. More men. Stronger ground to defend." I nodded, mounted again, and helped her back into the saddle. All afternoon we followed the trail. Once or twice we spotted scraps of cloth snagged on brush, bits of food dropped along the way, proof enough of the outlaws' carelessness. At one point a shadow passed over us, a hawk circling high above. Anokei looked up at it, then muttered something I couldn't understand. "What was that?" I asked. "A prayer," she said simply. We pressed on. As dusk fell, we finally crested a ridge and caught sight of it, Devil's Cut. It was a jagged scar in the earth, a canyon that seemed to swallow the last light of day. Sharp rock walls plunged down into shadow, and even from a distance I could see the thin wisp of smoke rising from within. Anokei narrowed her eyes. "They're here." We dismounted and led the horse to a sheltered spot behind a stand of boulders. From here, we'd have to go the rest of the way on foot. We left the saddlebag and took only what we needed: my rifle, her knife, a pair of canteens. As we approached the edge of the canyon, the sound of voices drifted up, laughter, the occasional harsh bark of an order. I eased forward and peered down. The camp was sprawled at the bottom, 3 wagons circled up, a half-dozen horses tied nearby, and at least 10 men milling about. In the center, 2 women bound at the wrists but still upright sat near the fire. Even in the fading light I could tell they shared Anokei's proud bearing, though their faces were pale and drawn. Anokei crouched beside me, her fingers digging into the rock. "Kiona," she whispered. "Misu." Her eyes burned, but her voice stayed steady. I counted heads. 12 men, just like she'd said. Most carried pistols, a few had rifles slung lazily over their shoulders. A sentry stood farther up the path, but he looked more interested in his flask than the darkness beyond. "They're cocky," I murmured. Anokei's lips tightened. "They don't expect anyone to come for them." I pulled back and sat with my back to the rock, thinking. 2 of us against 12, I said finally. "If we go in loud, we won't make it far." Her gaze met mine, hard and unflinching. "We wait," she said. "We watch. Tonight we cut their throats while they sleep if we have to." I almost smiled. "You really are your father's daughter," I muttered. That earned me the faintest flicker of a grin before she looked back toward the canyon. We settled into position as darkness swallowed the camp below. I checked my rifle, counting the rounds, while she ran her thumb along the blade of her knife, murmuring under her breath again, It wasn't a prayer this time. It was a promise. And as the stars came out and the fire below burned low, I found myself making the same promise. To her, to her sisters, to myself. We'd bring them out of that pit, and God help anyone who tried to stop us. The night settled heavy and black over the canyon. The only light came from the outlaws' campfire below, flickering against the jagged walls of Devil's Cut. Anokei and I lay flat on a ledge overlooking the camp, the rock cold beneath us, the air thick with the smell of smoke and horses. Below, the men laughed and passed bottles around, their voices echoing faintly up the canyon. The two girls, Kiona and Misu, sat close to the fire, their hands-bound heads bowed. I watched the sentry at the upper path, still leaning on his rifle, still more drunk than alert. I turned to Anokei. "We wait until they bed down," I whispered. She nodded, once her eyes never leaving her sister's. Hours passed slow as honey. One by one, the outlaws drifted off, curling into their blankets, boots still on pistols tucked under their arms. At last, the canyon fell quiet, but for the crackle of the dying fire and the occasional snort of a horse. I gave her a look. She answered with a steady breath. We moved. Slipping down a narrow goat trail, we hugged the shadows. The rock walls swallowed us in darkness, our boots silent on the sand. When we reached the sentry, he was snoring softly against a boulder, his rifle resting loose across his knees. Anokei didn't hesitate. She slid her knife across his throat, catching him before he could even gasp. She eased him to the ground and wiped her blade on his coat. We pressed on. At the edge of the camp, I stopped and studied the sleeping forms. There were more than we thought, 14, maybe 15 men in all. Too many to take head-on, but luck was on our side. The two sisters were tied to a post a few feet from the wagons, far enough from the men that we could reach them before anyone stirred. We crept forward, slow and low, every nerve in me stretched thin. When we reached them, Kiona's eyes snapped open. Even in the faint light, I saw the fear there, then recognition as she looked at Anokei. Anokei pressed a finger to her lips, then cut the ropes at their wrists. Misu let out a tiny sob as her hands fell free, but Anokei hushed her with a touch. I motioned them both toward the rocks. We'd nearly made it back when a bottle clinked against the stones behind us. We froze. One of the outlaws had rolled over his hand, knocking the bottle loose. His eyes fluttered open. For a second, the whole world held its breath. Then he sat up, blinking blearily at us. Hey, that was all he got out. My knife sank into his chest before he could make a sound. I caught him as he fell, lowering him to the ground, my heart pounding loud in my ears. But it was too late. Another man stirred, then another. And then the shouting began. We ran. The sisters clung to each other's skirts, catching on the rocks as we scrambled up the trail. Behind us, voices roared, gunshots cracked through the night, bullets sparking off stone. I shoved Misu ahead of me and fired back down the path, dropping one man before he could clear his pistol. Anokei stayed close, her knife flashing, when a bandit lunged at her from the shadows. The climb was hell loose, gravel, steep switchbacks, but we made it to the ridge just as the outlaws spilled out of the camp below. I pulled the sisters behind a boulder and dropped to one knee, working the lever of my rifle. The first few men charged up the trail shouting curses, but the canyon worked against them, narrow, exposed, with no room to dodge. I shot the lead man square in the chest, and he tumbled back into the others, buying us a few precious seconds. Go, I barked. Anokei grabbed her sisters and hauled them toward the horses while I laid down fire, each shot cracking through the night, each bandit who fell buying us another heartbeat. When my rifle clicked empty, I swung it over my shoulder and sprinted after them. The horses were skittish from the noise, but still there. Anokei was already boosting Misu into the saddle. "Ride," I yelled as I mounted. We thundered out into the desert just as the first outlaws crested the ridge. Bullets whined past us, kicking up dust, but none found their mark. We rode hard and fast, the wind whipping against us, the ground a blur beneath the hooves. When the canyon finally fell away behind us, and no more shots came, I slowed and glanced back. The ridgeline was empty. We'd made it. We didn't stop until the moon hung high overhead and the horses were slick with sweat. When at last we dismounted, the sisters collapsed into each other's arms, sobbing quietly. Anokei stood a few feet away, staring back at the black line of the canyon on the horizon. I walked over and stood beside her. "You kept your promise," I said. Her eyes glittered in the moonlight, but her voice was steady. "No," she said. "We still owe them for my father." I nodded slowly, and though we'd pulled her sisters from that hellhole, I knew she was right. This wasn't over. Not yet. Dawn broke red and raw across the desert, streaks of gold splitting the clouds like fire. We'd ridden through the night and stopped only when the horses began to stumble with exhaustion. The sisters slept huddled together in the scant shade of a rock. Anokei and I stayed awake, crouched at the edge of the camp. We'd made our eyes fixed on the empty horizon behind us. Neither of us spoke, but we didn't have to. They'd come for us. And we meant to meet them halfway. When the first speck of dust rose in the distance, I was already checking my rifle, counting cartridges, feeling the weight of each one like a prayer. Anokei stood behind me, tying back her hair, her knife glinting in the morning light. "They'll follow the canyon trail," she said. "They think we'll keep running." I nodded. "We won't." Her lips tightened. "We kill them all." I didn't argue. We mounted up and rode south, skirting a dry wash that would lead us into Devil's Hollow, a narrow cut in the earth that funneled riders into a choke point. It was the perfect place to make a stand. We reached the hollow by mid-morning, the sun already baking the rocks. We left the sisters hidden in a shallow cave above the trail and set to work. I positioned myself on a ledge overlooking the path where I could see for miles. Below, Anokei crouched in the dust-setting stones, laying traps, her movements fast and sure, her expression a mask of focus. When everything was ready, we waited. It wasn't long before we heard them. The sound came first, hoofbeats drumming against the earth, growing louder, closer. Then came the voices shouting, cursing, their words carried up the canyon walls. And then they appeared. 10 of them, maybe 12, riding hard, their guns already drawn, eyes fixed on the trail ahead. They didn't see us. Not yet. I took a breath, lined up the sight, and fired. The lead rider pitched forward his horse, screaming as it reared, and threw him to the ground. Chaos. The men scrambled horses, crashing into one another, shouting to find where the shot came from. I fired again, another man down. Below, Anokei leapt from her hiding place and cut down the first one to dismount, her knife flashing once, twice, before he crumpled in the dust. The others tried to climb the slope toward me, but the rocks gave way under their boots. They were trapped. I kept firing, each shot echoing through the hollow like thunder. One of them managed to scramble close enough to take aim at me, but before he could pull the trigger, Anokei dragged him backward, driving her blade deep into his ribs. 2 more broke and ran, abandoning their horses, scrambling for the far end of the hollow. I dropped one where he stood. The last one disappeared into the rocks. And then it was quiet. The air hung thick with dust and gunpowder. The only sounds left were the horses' panicked snorts and the faint whistle of wind through the canyon. I climbed down slowly, my hands still tight on the rifle, my heart hammering in my chest. Anokei stood in the center of the hollow, her hair wild around her face, her knife slick and red, her breath coming in quick bursts. Around her lay the dead. All of them. She didn't move until I reached her side. Then finally she looked up at me. "It's done," I said. She shook her head. "Not yet." Her eyes flicked to the last man, the one who'd run now, crawling from the rocks, clutching at a bleeding leg. He froze when he saw us watching him. Anokei walked over, slow and deliberate, her knife still in hand. She stood above him, her shadow falling across his face. "You killed my father," she said. The man's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her knife flashed once more, and then he was still. She straightened, wiping the blade clean on her skirt, and turned back to me. Now it was done. We collected what we could from the body's ammunition, water, anything useful, and untied the bandits' horses, letting them scatter into the desert. When we climbed back to where the sisters waited, they stood in silence, their eyes wide and solemn. Kiona reached out and took Anokei's hand. Misu whispered something I couldn't hear. And just like that, the weight of it all seemed to lift a little. We mounted up and began the long ride back north. The sun was high now, and though my arms ached and my throat was dry, I couldn't help but glance at Anokei riding ahead, her shoulders straight, her chin high. The wind caught the feather in her hair, sending it dancing behind her like a banner. And for the first time I allowed myself to believe we might just make it home. We rode through the night again, though this time there was no sense of flight, only a quiet determination to bring the sisters home before another dawn. The desert stretched ahead of us, painted silver by the moonlight, the stars spilling thick across the sky. The two sisters clung to Anokei, who rode between them on her horse. They barely spoke, but every now and then I'd catch Kiona's hand, reaching for her older sisters, or Misu resting her cheek against Anokei's back. The air grew cooler as we neared the mountains, and I knew we were close. Even before I saw it, I could feel the land changing greener, more alive, the stones giving way to grass and scattered trees. By the time the sun rose behind us, the valley of their tribe opened below, soft and quiet. Smoke curled lazily from low huts, and at the far end, the wide river sparkled in the morning light. We stopped at the ridge and simply looked down for a long moment. "This is it," Anokei murmured. I glanced at her. Her jaw was set, but her eyes glistened. "You want me to ride in with you?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment, then shook her head. "You've already done more than anyone could," she said softly. I dismounted as they did, and we walked the rest of the way. At the edge of the village, people began to appear, children first, then women carrying baskets, then men with spears slung over their shoulders. Their voices fell silent as they saw us coming. When they saw Anokei's face, a ripple of recognition passed through them. When they saw her sisters still clinging to her, tears began to fall. One elder stepped forward, tall, stern, with white feathers bound into his hair. He looked at the three sisters for a long time, then at me. Anokei let go of her sisters and took a step forward. "They're safe," she said, her voice steady though quiet. "The men who took them are gone." The elder nodded slowly. His eyes swept over me once more, then he spoke words I didn't understand. Anokei translated. "He says the debt is paid." I nodded. The people began to gather around the sisters, touching their faces, brushing their hair, whispering words of comfort. Anokei stood for a moment among them, then turned back to me. "You'll go now?" she asked. I studied her, her proud stance, her weary eyes, the faint trace of a smile that hovered on her lips despite everything. "You'll be all right?" I asked. She nodded. "I've got them now," she said, glancing at her sisters. I tipped my hat and turned to go, but her voice stopped me. Wes. I looked back. Her dark eyes held mine and she said only, "Thank you." I gave her the smallest of smiles. "You don't need to thank me, not for this. I left the village the way I'd come, quiet, unnoticed, just another rider on the wind." When I reached the ridge again, I looked back. The three sisters stood at the edge of the village watching me, their silhouettes sharp against the morning sky. I raised a hand, and though I couldn't hear them anymore, I felt the weight lift from my chest, light as the feathers that still danced in her hair. The desert opened before me, endless and empty, but not lonely. Not anymore. The debt was paid. And as the wind carried me westward, I knew one thing for sure: some debts are worth every drop of blood they cost. So here ends our story, a quiet tale of sand blood and gratitude written across the wild, indifferent plains. We began in the dust of a nameless city at a slave auction. No one wanted to remember where a cowboy bought more than a girl. He bought his way back into the story of a family that had once saved his life. Through long nights and cruel trails, through gunfire and vengeance, he carried three sisters out of darkness and back into the light of their home. In the end, the feathers in her hair and the proud look in her eyes were all the thanks he needed. And as the canyon faded behind him and the sunrise painted the desert gold, his shadow grew long and light, swallowed gently by the promise of another horizon. So sleep easy tonight, friends, knowing even in the harshest places some debts are honored and some hearts remain true.